All right. Sound check. Sound check. See Farsight in the house as usual. The custodian of sound, fulfilling his duty faithfully. All right. Welcome, everybody, to Canhammer TV. Tonight is Custodes Tactica episode 34. We will be starting our 9th edition unit deep dives. And so in 8th edition, if you recall, we went through every single army slot and talked about units, every unit that we had at the time in each slot. What we're going to do now in 9th is redo that process with new book and 9th in mind, but we're going to be deep diving each unit. So each episode may not be an hour and a half long or whatever, but we're going to try and cover each unit in as much detail as we can. And so hopefully, especially people who are new to the army, there are a lot of new people coming into the army, they can go back and start this process with us. Some of it is very similar to 8th, but a lot of it has changed. So hopefully it will be useful for everybody. So welcome everybody to this show. As I commented on the Discord maybe last week, I was clearing out my closet because I have to make space for some plumbing work that needs to be done. My closet's on the other side of the bathroom. I have to go through the wall. So I have to clear out the closet space so the guy can get into the wall. And in so doing, I discovered all these t-shirts, gaming Warhammer related t-shirts that I'd forgotten I'd had. And so I'm going to try and wear a different Warhammer related t-shirt every week. And so that should be fun. And so this first one here is a throwback to 8th edition when I played Dark Angels, Ravenwing, Keep Calm, and Jink, which is awesome. So I remember playing in a local RTT with a Ravenwing list, and I was wearing this shirt, so that was awesome. Anyway, so every week we'll be wearing a different shirt because I found all these shirts, so I might as well wear them. You know, whenever I go to a tournament, I tend to wear the same thing, either my Canhammer jersey or the Custodes shirt or something. So this will give me an opportunity to wear all these different shirts. That's why they all ended up at the bottom of the shelf to begin with. So, hobby-wise, we are starting to work on the Harlequins. We're going to pick up just a few more troops and some of the Skyweavers tomorrow. But we will be working on Harlequins to go with my Eldar things up there. So I'm committed to playing these guys at some point because I spent 4 freaking months painting them, and they will be going with Harlequins. So that is their fate. Whether they're a Seer Council or maybe just Shining Spears, I don't know. But we will be playing some Harlequins. And I've got an interesting idea to paint them. I don't know it's going to work, so I'm not going to reveal it yet. I've probably told a few people already. I want to make them kind of chromatic, like a chromatic blur. But I don't know if that idea is going to work at all with how I envision it in my mind. I often have visions in my mind that I cannot fulfill. Speaking of visions I cannot fulfill, I will be starting work on my bust soon, and yet another vision I probably will not be able to fulfill, but that is super exciting. That's things to look forward to hobby-wise. In terms of schedule, next week I am on call, but I intend to have a full schedule because I often don't have to go into the hospital when I'm on call. It's right now it's still tentative, but Monday night will be an interview with Carlos Kaiser. Carlos was on Tactica quite some while ago, I think before the last LVO. He's quite a fan of Custodes, and so he's been brewing up some lists. I think it's pretty similar to the list I've been playing, and he's going to some kind of SoCal Invitational this weekend with some pretty big players going there. So he was eager to share his experience with everybody, and we will be doing that on Monday night. There will be a game next week at some point, and there will be a podcast next week as well at some point. So look out for the schedule. It'll be coming up this weekend, which of course is Labor Day weekend. So hope everybody has a good long weekend. All right, let's dive into it. So first of all, shout out to everybody who's a follower or a subscriber or a patron. Big appreciation to the patrons. If you are in the Discord, shout out to you guys. If you're not in the Discord, the link is right there. Hopefully it works. I mean, the Discord links are kind of silly. Why don't you just give us a link that never goes away? But here is the link to join the Discord and join our community. Nick, he already did the invitational. Okay, I think, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it was this weekend, but he wasn't available to speak to me till next week, which is cool. So tonight is episode 34 and the first of our unit deep dives. And of course, what better way to start looking at units than the man himself, Trajan Valoris. So for those of you watching and who are into these sort of things, you probably know that this is not Trajan Valoris. This is my substitute model for Trajan Valoris. This is actually the Forge World Ixian Hail model, and you can tell it because he brings his own stairs to battle because he's that cool. Anyway, so I just love this model because of the stairs. I don't really like the Valoris model. I don't like all the lions and all that stuff, and the Valdor model's even crazier. So he's my Trajan, and I love this guy. So I can't remember where I got him. I haven't ever been to Forge World. I think it was maybe at like an Adepticon or something like that. Anyway, so that's Ixian Hail model that I use for Trajan. But we're going to be talking about Trajan tonight. Let me pull my notes up. Okay. So I have prepared notes, 5 pages of notes to try and get my thoughts in order. And when I was trying to think about how to do these deep dives, I didn't want it to just be me randomly rambling for an hour. I want to make it kind of easy to follow, as well as in segments, and talk about everything about the thing, but do it in an organized fashion. So what I've decided to do with each one of these is I'm going to go over sections. So we're going to start with the role keywords, okay, stats, so data slate stats. Then we're going to talk about shooting, melee. We're going to talk about the other abilities and rules on the data sheet. Then we're going to talk about points. Then we're going to see if there are any comparables in terms of the other factions of the game and how it matches up with other comparable units that we might come across. Then we're going to talk about applicable Warlord traits and relics. Obviously, that won't apply to non-character models, but that's one of the sections. Then we're going to talk about stratagems, and this is maybe some of the meat there. What stratagems can the unit use? Which stratagems are commonly used, and what stratagems maybe people are overlooking in terms of using with these units? And then we're going to talk about some list ideas with the units, if it's not obvious. And then we're going to talk about general and specific play strategies. And then we're going to talk finally of overall rating in terms of how that unit rates in our book. So this seems like a lot of segments, but some of them will fly past. Some of them will be more in depth, but I figure we will not miss anything if we do it like this for every unit. Okay, so let's get started. So Trajan obviously is our Captain General. He's in charge. He's an HQ model. He is infantry, and he's a character. So nothing too surprising there. The fact that he's infantry is important. Obviously that he's character, and he is a named character. So that has implications in terms of warlord traits and things like that. So let's go into his stats. So he's basically got a fairly baseline Custodes stat line. So 6 move, 2 weapon skill ballistic skill, toughness 5. He does have 7 wounds, which is very good. He's probably one of the most normal humanoid sized models that has 7 wounds. And 2 up save and a natural 3 up invuln. And he has 5 attacks base and not really any way of increasing that, unfortunately, except with the +1 attack banner. So if we're talking stats, he's a tanky guy. He is T5, 2 up save, 3 up invuln, 7 wounds. He is very tanky. He can survive a lot of things, like with anybody with a 2 up, 3 up, and he's T5. 7 wounds makes a big difference. He can absorb 2 3 damage hits. or 4 2 damage hits. So, is pretty tanky. No feel, no pain or anything like that, which is unfortunate, but, he's a pretty tanky guy. And if you're lucky on the old 3-up invulns, you can survive a lot of damage with just this one guy. And so that has effects which we'll talk about later in terms of how tanky he is. And then he's often within a -1 to hit aura too, so that just adds to his overall tankiness. In terms of his attacks, 5 attacks is a little bit lackluster these days. 5 attacks was pretty good when he came out, but 5 attacks now on your bee's knees guy in the realm of freaking assault intercessors getting 4 or 5 attacks, it's pretty lackluster. And there's no way he doesn't get +1 on the charge or when charged or any of these kind of rules. So 5 attacks is pretty lackluster. And then if you throw in his D3 damage, as we'll get to later, it becomes pretty unreliable in terms of how much actual damage you can do with him. 5 attacks is better than 3 attacks or 4 attacks, but it's still only 5 attacks. It's an old data sheet, and so maybe things get updated later on, but that's the one thing that kind of stands out. Okay, so that's his stat line. Nothing too surprising there. There's still people out there who are surprised when you tell them that Trajan has 7 wounds. So, that's kind of the standout on the data sheet there. Okay, shooting-wise, nothing too impressive. He has basically the same axe bolter that the axe Custodes have, strength with -1, 2 damage, which is good. That -1 is key, and the 2 damage is so good. And then his rapid fire, obviously, he is strength 5, which is good. So that just makes it extra easier to wound T4 things, and you can wound Gravis armor on 4s. So also makes wounding T8 things on 5s instead of 6s. So that extra strength does make a difference, but at the end of the day, it's still just like a couple of shots or 1 shot. The 2 damage is nice, and that goes for all the kind of bolter weapons that the Custodes have. People moan that we don't have bolter discipline and all this sort of stuff. It's probably because it would be a little bit strong with 2 damage bolters. -1, 2 damage bolters. Okay. So not much more else to say about his shooting because that's all he has. His shots are reliable to hit though, like with all Custodes, hitting on 2s, rerolls his own 1s, he's always in his own aura, so you basically auto hits. Okay, melee. So in combat, he is not a slouch, but I feel like people overestimate the amount of damage that he can do. Sure, I've had 3 or 4 games where he will go into somebody with his 5 attacks. He will auto hit them, hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, auto hit. He will wound on 3s or 2s all the time, rerolling 1s, so it's almost auto wound, but not always. But reliably 4 or 5 attacks go through. Unless they have a good invuln, they're going to fail -3 AP, and then it comes to the curse of the D3. And Trajan really should have just picked up the Admona Mortis axe that was right next to his, but instead he picked up the Watcher's axe because he thought it looked cooler. And then when he got into combat, he was like, wow, this axe doesn't do shit. And then the other guy who stole the Admona Mortis axe is doing flat 3 damage over there. So he really picked up the wrong relic. But the D3 is really, really lackluster. You can just as easily do 6 damage with 5 attacks as you can do 12 damage. And it's that poor consistency that makes him not as strong in combat as he should be as the Captain General of Custodes. Your Vexilla walking around with the Admona Mortis is going to do more damage than Trajan. So it's a little bit unfortunate. It is what it is, and who knows if everything goes from D3 gets changed to 2 damage, he should be a beneficiary of that, even though his axe should probably be 3 damage. But so the D3 is really the letdown for him in the combat area. I've gone into Call one time and did 15 damage on the guy. I've gone into another character and done 6 damage. So, you do have to pick your battles carefully with Trajan. He's not as hitty as you would like. If it's a Hail Mary, you have to kill this tank to win, he might do that. He might not. If it's a kill this, company commander, he's going to rock the company commander. If it's kill a unit of 5 scouts, he will kill those scouts. But you have to pick your battles with 5 attacks, D3 damage. If he went to straight 2 or straight 3, he would instantly get way better in combat. The only saving grace, of course, is that he is strength 10, so he wounds everything's at least on 3s, sometimes on 2s, and so that's good with his reroll 1 aura, which he's always in range of. So he does kind of auto hit, auto wound, but anything with a 4-up invuln, even 5-up invuln, now whittles his attacks down, and then you're doing D3 damage. It can get pretty underwhelming when you put this 195-point character into something and you expect him to do something. So keep that in mind. The one thing I always forget about Trajan is he comes with his own Misericordia. Funnily enough, it's on the front there. And so I always forget he has that, but he has 1 extra attack with the Misericordia, which is just standard dagger, and that could blink off that last wound that you're missing because you rolled badly on D3. So don't forget the Misericordia. I'm as guilty as anyone else, but he comes with it kind of for free. So don't forget that. So that's kind of his combat characteristics. He should be good. Sometimes he is, sometimes he's not. Okay. So let's go into the other abilities and rules that he has on his sheet. So he is the Captain General. He gives a 6-inch aura of reroll 1s to hit and reroll 1s to wound. Now, some people would argue that he should be full rerolls. We often don't need it. I mean, our whole army hits on 2s unless there's modifiers, which are now capped. Hits on 2s or 3s rerolling 1s is pretty good. And then most of our army wounds things on 3s most of the time. Either that or it's on 5s. So, reroll 1s to wound is pretty universal. There are not a lot of things that give full reroll to wound auras out there. So his auras are as expected. Now, the reroll to wound aura, I think, is actually quite good. In the games that I experimented in without Trajan, I really missed reroll 1s to wound. Like, not only are you losing 2s, but you're also losing those 1s which you could convert. So reroll wounds aura on him is quite good, and probably justifies his presence. You kind of miss it when it's not there. There are not a lot of things in our book that allow you to reroll wounds. You've got him. You've got the Biker Lance's reroll wounds only when you charge. You can totally feel that lack of reroll wounds when you get charged and you're playing Bikers. You totally feel that lack of reroll, especially when you're going up against something over toughness 6. So it is a big deal to be able to reroll the wound, and he is one of few sources we have for it. Other than that, it's like a few anti-tank weapons reroll just against vehicles, so we don't rock around with a lot of reroll to wound, and so he is super key for that, and I feel that's a big strength of his. Okay, so he is OBSEC, which is often clutch late game. You're trying to get him onto a midfield or back opponent's objective, and he just steals it because he's OBSEC. Or he gets that charge in at the end and gets on it, and he steals it because he's OBSEC. So him being like our whole army being OBSEC is great, but having your characters OBSEC as well, so good. If you leave him standing in the midfield objective, the opponent can send a few non-OBSEC units to try and steal that objective. Unless they can kill him, they won't steal it. So the fact that he's OBSEC is really quite good, and very clutch. Okay, now we come to the Moment Shackle. Okay, so the Moment Shackle is his ability that he can use once a game to do one of 3 things. Number 1 is he could spend it to heal himself D3. That's pretty good. Potentially heals up to 3 damage, potentially only 1 damage, and he has to survive that attack in order to heal. I have used this maybe 2 or 3 times in my whole career of playing with Trajan, and it is often lackluster. And in fact, it is probably the one thing I would just plan not to use unless you're really desperate and he needs to survive to win the game and you still haven't used it. So that's the heal activation. The other activation is at the end of the fight phase, he can use it to pile in and attack again. So all 5 attacks. That's obviously good and situationally useful if you need him to kill something. Again, you run the whole thing we already discussed about how little sometimes he does, but potentially he could do a lot. So again, if you're in that situation where you really need him to attack again and he hasn't used it already, then you could certainly do that and it might really help you. Now, the bee's knees is the third ability, which used to be a CP regen, but now is a free stratagem. 1 stratagem for free. And this is so clutch for many, many reasons. Literally, Trajan was on the way out of my list when they FAQ'd this, and then he went straight back into my list. So being able to give us a free stratagem is amazing. 3 CP strats, Homer, Teleport Homer, Stooping Diver, 3 CP strats. For free. That's like 3 extra CP you just had. And you can do that when you have 0 CP. So it can be a bit of a gotcha moment. So that's amazing. Even if you don't use Stooping Dive or Homer, refunding a 2 CP strat, especially late in the game when you don't have 2 CP left, so good. Your opponent has not planned on you being able to transhuman something in the last turn of the game because you only have 1 CP, or an interrupt, or a pass morale, God help you. So good still to use it on a 2 CP. In fact, in the last few games where I have not used Homer or Stooping Dive, I've been using it on a transhuman to save CP. So that is still so good. It's a lot less good using it on a 1 CP strat. But you could, if you haven't used it yet and you're desperate and you have no CP and you need 1 CP to interrupt or something, go for it. That's what it's there for. So good, so good. And with that, even starting in a list playing with only 8 CP to start with, I don't need any more CP regen. I spare my commander trait now for something better. I don't need to run a stupid Inquisitor for regen. I don't need anything else for regen. I rock with 8 CP to start with and Trajan, and that's enough for me. So it's really quite good. And if I would say you need to have CP regen in the game right now, unless you're maybe running G-Man who gives you an extra 3 and you're not spending a lot pre-game. But you need some kind of CP regen most of the time. He is enough by himself. If you're not going to run him, you're going to have to run the commander trait or an Inquisitor or some kind of CP regen. Our power is too tied to CP to not have some form of regen of 2 or 3 CP over the course of the game. And that's what he gives you. In fact, if you run the CP regen trait, you're spending 1 CP to run it. And then in the first turn, maybe you don't use anything. So there are turns where you aren't going to be able to regen it. It's not a 5-turn thing. And then in turns where you spam a lot of CP, you only get 1 back for all those CP. So really, you're only getting 2, maybe 3 back with the CP regen trait, and you're spending 1 to take it. And he's auto 3 or auto 2. So that is why he kind of replaces that trait with that Moment Shackle now. So Moment Shackle, super, super good. Okay. Points. So Trajan is 195 points. He went up in 9th edition. He's at 195. That is quite expensive. Nobody can argue that that is not expensive. It's almost 200 points. He was 250, I believe, when he first came out, which was crazy, and nobody played him. And I would not play him at 250. But he came right down, and then now he has a small price adjustment to 195. That's a lot. Nope, you can't argue that that's a lot. He's fairly hard to kill for 195 points, but 5 attack. This is where the 5 attacks D3 damage thing really starts to kick you in the nuts when you're paying 195 points. He's got a few reroll auras. The Moment Shackle is great, but when you think about things out there that do way more damage and have similar auras and are way cheaper than 195 points, they have similar invulns and things, you start to get a little bit salty. But, 195 points is what it is, and it's a little bit over if you have an honest assessment. But it is what it is. If he goes to flat damage, then I'll be much happier to pay that 195. But so there you go. Okay, there's been a question right now about G-Man and Trajan. We are going to talk about that right now. The next section is called comparables or comparables. Okay, so, for 195 points, he's not that comparable to a lot of things. If you're trying to compare him to other HQs or named HQs in similarly elite armies, you're not coming across a lot of comparables. You can't really compare him to a chapter master who's just a captain with some CP spent on him. He has all the reroll or just one of the reroll auras, and he might have like some smashy weapons. It's hard to compare that. This is talking different price brackets. Smash captains come a little bit closer price wise, like 140 or something, but you're not talking about a lot of comparables there. Maybe the closest comparables would be like Drago or Valdis. I think they're heading close to the 200 mark. And those guys are harder to compare to because they have they're paying points for psychic powers. So it's hard to compare because he has no psychic powers at all. So it's hard to compare that directly. So Calgar is a good comparable because he's kind of like not Primarch level, but he's like Chapter Master level, and he has just a lot of baked in rules and things. Calgar hits a lot harder than Trajan does, and having damage is amazing. So I would say Calgar is a little bit tougher than Trajan and hits harder than Trajan. So, but we're talking kind of in that 200 point range. There are not a lot of other comparables. So let's compare him to G-Man, okay? Because right now there's a bunch of G-Man lists floating around for Custodes, and which is great. The point of the whole channel, of course, is to play pure Custodes, but I recognize that G-Man is very attractive. For twice the points, I think. Or was he 350 or 400? I can't remember. But for a decent chunk of more points, he is harder to kill. Same save and invulns, but his toughness is higher and he has more wounds. He can come back on a 4-up. And he just does way more damage than Trajan would ever do. Way more. Same in terms of for us, same reroll aura, same wound reroll aura, and gives you extra plus move and advance, which is great. Some people are even running whole shield hosts just to give that movement, so that's great. And there's a certain fear of the G-Man because he has a reputation of killing things. So definitely you can try and compare G-Man to Trajan. Trajan's like a mini G-Man. He's not as hard to kill. He has similar defensive stats, but he's just not as tough to kill. He doesn't get back up. He doesn't hit as hard as G-Man. He has similar reroll wounds. G-Man gives you 3 CP. He kind of gives you functionally 2 or 3 CP, although you can use G-Man CP for something else. So I think unless you want to run soup with G-Man, I think Trajan's a comparable. Would I run both? I don't know. That's like 600 points in HQs, in 2 HQs. I don't think you need to run both. Yeah, so there's a pretty good comparable. But, toughness-wise, T5, 2-up, 3-up invuln, 7 wounds. There's not a lot of this size models, HQ models out there that are like that. Demon Prince doesn't have 3-up invulns. They have a bit more wounds. They don't have 2 armor saves. Some of them do, I guess. So, Demon Princes, stuff like that, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So those are the comparables that came to my mind. If you have any other comparables, let me know in the chat and we can chat about it. Obviously, I'm not super familiar with every single model in the game, but there it is. Okay. Warlord traits. So Warlord traits, because he's a named character, he has chosen his Warlord trait, Champion of the Imperium. Now, before we got our book, my default Warlord trait was Champion of the Imperium. Not on Trajan sometimes, but on another person. Champion of the Imperium is a great Warlord trait. In fact, all our Warlord traits are fairly good. But a 12-inch aura allowing you to heroically intervene is just amazing. So that's just really good and can sometimes be clutch and sometimes game winning. And now we have the ability to do that for a CP. It's probably more situationally better when you really need it and you don't have to devote a Warlord trait to it. But it's a good Warlord trait, and so he has that as standard. You can't give him any others. People have been arguing on the Discord whether you can use 10,000 heroes to give him another Warlord trait. I don't think that is intended, obviously. And then there's Raw. If you read it really carefully, Raw, probably you would just have to give him Champion of the Imperium again. So anyway, he wouldn't do that. So, and he can't take any other Warlord traits. So there's that. Okay. He can't take relics because he's a name character. So there you go. We already said he chose the wrong relic axe. So don't need to discuss relics anymore. Okay, stratagems. Okay, so we're going to cover some of the more useful stratagems for him. Obviously, as an infantry character in the Custodes army, he has access to a whole bunch of stratagems, many of which you would never use on him unless really desperate. We'll maybe cover some of those. So, Tanglefoot. So he can Tanglefoot because he's infantry. Now, that can sometimes be key. He might be the guy closest to the back when something drops in behind you. He might be the guy at the front when you're running a bunch of bikes or vehicles. So in the old list, when people were running more vehicles, he was your only source of Tanglefoot. So, being able to use Tanglefoot off him, and remember there's no line of sight needed, then that can be key. In terms of Golden Portal, deep striking him, I don't think I've ever deep struck Trajan. I don't feel like there's really much need to deep strike him, especially just pushes up with your army. But you certainly can for a CP. And now I guess you could strategic reserve him, but it's going to cost you probably 2 CP to do that. So that's totally not worth it. So that's not really his role. You miss out on his auras. So I don't really see much point in deep striking him. So, Indomitable Guardians, again, situationally good. If he's standing on an objective, somebody comes to get him, he can interrupt for a CP in your opponent's phase. So, situationally good, again, a stratagem that you could use on Trajan. Of course, harkens back to his whole unreliability part in combat, but there it is. Okay, as infantry and Custodes, he's obviously a source for Spark of Divinity and Fortress of Willpower, the 2 psychic denial stratagems. So keep that in mind too. He is eligible to use those strats. Okay, Victor of the Blood Games. So this is a topic of much conversation. Actually, it had died pretty much until Brian Pullen told everybody on his stream, on our stream, that he would consider using it 2 times, spending 4 CP per game. I think nobody has really taken on to that because that's a lot of CP. But so do you spend 2 CP to give him Victor of the Blood Games? So I think Victor of the Blood Games is a trap most of the time. Sure, there's going to be the odd game where you're glad you spent the 2 CP so you didn't have to spend 1 CP to reroll that 1 invuln save that would kill him in turn 4, turn 5. We're going to talk about later why that's not a big deal that he dies. So in a game now where we are so CP dependent that we're running Trajan to get CP, I feel spending 2 of that CP to give him the odd reroll save, because he already rerolls all his attacks and everything, so you're never really going to need that. It's just a trap. So I wouldn't spend 2 CP to give him Victor of the Blood Games. And if you really need to spend a CP later to reroll 1 invuln to keep him alive because it's vital for you to win the game, then spend that CP. So yeah, I wouldn't do that. Okay, so we do have a fight on death strat. Even in death, it's 2 CP, and your characters only can fight on death. I've never used this, actually, because I've never been in a situation where by the time my characters are dying, I had the CP to use it. I guess there have been situations where I could have done it now. But so this is a situationally useful stratagem to keep in mind when you're fighting with Trajan. Now, the problem with it doesn't even combo with like the moment shackle. So it'd be cool if you like dying, then you moment shackle, then you fight on death, right? Like, it's like the Space Marine thing where you fight, then you fight twice, then you fight on death, right? Then he becomes a bit of a blender, but you can't combo those things together because one involves not doing it if you died, and the other is you can only do it if you died. So yeah. that's kind of weird. But yeah, so you just keep that in the back of your mind that you have this stratagem and sometimes you can use it. We have a stratagem to increase morale test by 1. Did people know that? I only just read that today because I totally forgotten about it. But anyway, okay. So we won't talk about 10,000 heroes. We already said that probably you shouldn't be putting 2 warlord traits on Trajan. You certainly can't shoulder onto him because he's not shield captain keyword. Okay, so stratagems like genetic alchemy, which is our transhuman, and Emperor's Old Spice. So he's eligible. You can certainly transhuman him or Emperor's Old Spice if he's getting attacked and you really need him to survive. If you still have the CP for that, or if you still have his Moment Shackle ability and you really need Trajan to survive, that could be a nice little trick to pull out late game to keep him alive when your opponent feels like he should be dead. Especially if you get that you have 0 CP and then you pop Moment Shackle to do a transhuman for free. That's a pretty neat trick. It's going to be very situationally helpful, but it is something to keep in mind if you only have Trajan and a few other models left and you got some spare CP knocking around or the Moment Shackle and you really need him to survive. That would really help. Minus 1 hit potentially, 2 up, 3 up, 7 wounds with transhuman. Not a lot of things are going to go through that very easily. So there you go. Slayer of Nightmares. So Slayer of Nightmares allows him to wound anything on 2s that's tougher than him, basically. Because he's already wounding everything in the game that tough on 3s, so he'll go up to wounding on 2s. And so he'll be auto-hitting, auto-wounding, basically. And so that can be situationally good. Again, 2 CP, and then the old D3 damage comes back to rear its ugly head again. So you got to really be desperate to be doing that. But it is something you can do with Trajan. And he's only T5, so a lot of the things you'd be wanting to kill like that would be greater toughness in him. Okay. So that's kind of the most applicable stratagems for, Trajan to consider using on himself. And generally, you don't end up using a lot of strats on Trajan because you don't really need to most of the time. And of course, if you're running Shadow Keepers, if you need to keep them alive, a Grim Responsibility here and there can also help. Aquiline Shield, all those specific ones for protecting characters can be helpful if that's what you want to achieve. Okay. So lists. So I don't think that he's an auto take, but I think he's pretty close. I think you need some, as I said before, you need some kind of CP regen in your list. And so if you're don't want to commit your command trait to it, you don't want to run an Inquisitor, then you'll probably end up taking Trajan. And, there could be worse things. So I think he's pretty close to something you have to think seriously about not putting in versus think seriously about putting him in. I certainly whack him in with a Shield Captain on Bike as the first 2 things I add on Battlescribe every time. It's probably because they're HQs and that's at the top, but, I don't really hesitate on that. I've generally had much better experiences with Trajan in a list than without. And for 20 points more than a Biker Cap, you could argue taking 2 Biker Caps save 20 points. I think that reroll 1 wound aura is good. Obviously, the CP regen is good. And being Strength 10 does help situationally. So I've won some games with Trajan in the last turn, making clutch kills in combat with like a good charge. I mean, the game against Adam at Charity Hammer was like the most recent example, I think, of Trajan making a key charge at the end of the game and tying that game for me. But I think just for reroll wounds of 1 and CP regen alone, it's worth taking Trajan if you have no other way of doing that. The worst comes to worst is he sits on a midfield objective and never shoots or hits anything. Is it still worth it then? Probably, because of that 3 CP and for the times when things are around him and he gives the rerolls. Having 2 characters having the reroll hit aura is really good, and one of them having wound, helps a lot. So I think he's pretty close up there. Not auto take, but a serious consideration in any list to not take him. You have to think about that. Okay, play strategies. How do you play Trajan? Okay. Well, Trajan is a foot-slogging guy. He does move 6. He can advance up to 6. So he is slow, but really that's not really slow. That's standard, okay? 6-inch movement is like the standard movement in 40K. If you go faster than that, then great. If you go slower than that, then that sucks. I mean, 5-inch movement and 4-inch movement really sucks compared to things that can move 6. When you tell people your Terminators can move 6 inches, they're like, what? So, 6 inches is the standard movement. So he's not slow, he's not fast, he just is, okay? As you've seen many times in my streams, he can get where he needs to go with moving and advancing. You give up his shooting for advancing, or you don't need to charge anything because he's behind a wall of Terminators anyway. No big deal. Just advance him to keep him in the auras. It's not a big deal that he doesn't shoot. The other thing he can do, of course, is he can pop your scramblers for you. If you don't need to advance him, he can pop your midfield scramblers for you, which can be very helpful, or your opponent's zone scramblers, or even your own zone scramblers, because he's infantry. You lose his auras though, so watch out for that. But if you need to, he can do that for you. But by the third turn, fourth turn, he's in your opponent's zone after a couple of turns of advancing. So it's not that huge a deal. So I wouldn't worry too much that he's foot slogging. Obviously, it's not as fast as a biker cap, but we're not comparing the two. And you can see how far the Vexilla can get in a game. It's the same thing. So just moving and advancing the first couple of turns can be very important to getting him into the thick of it. I think you're really not using him well if he's just standing in the back the whole time. Now, late game, he's generally in the middle. Now you have a choice of what to do about Trajan. He's actually a really good character when standing in the middle, especially with the smaller table, either pushing into your opponent's zone or heading towards a corner or an edge to clear out annoying infantry units that have snuck in for recon or onto your backfield. So he's really quite good at being the guy. After you don't need his reroll auras anymore, he goes backwards to clear stuff out. I've done that a lot with him recently, clearing Inceptors and going back and taking out little units that come in here and there. So he's really quite good at going backwards again after attaining the middle of the field. And that's perfectly fine because he is more than capable of surviving anything that would be able to do that to you at that time of the game, and definitely capable of killing all of those things, which can cap you back objectives. So that is a nice thing. I like to move him up to the middle and then assess where I'm going to need him in the next couple of turns and then point him that way. If you need him to come in and help you clear a tough unit, he can definitely do that. Make sure you leave a little space he can charge through. And so he has multiple uses if you can get him to the middle of the field early on, by turn 2 sort of thing. As we say, he is hitty and killy on the right units. If you sink him into a unit of 4-up invulns, he might do zilch. If you stick him into a bunch of guardsmen, he's going to blend them. If you stick him into some Gravis guys, he's probably going to kill 2 or 3 of those guys. So you have to have realistic expectations of what he can do. And if you point him at the right targets, he can really help you. If you point him at bad targets, he will not do anything. The other way, obviously, playing Trajan, moving him up behind your front line, you keep him in the auras. And that's why it's often good to advance him so that you can then, when you charge forward, you're still in the auras without losing number of attacks. So, 6-inch auras, pre-measure. Always be aware of your auras when you're charging, all these kind of things. If you just outcharge your aura, you regret that more often than not. So, stay in your auras. Suicide Trajan. As I say, he can be very good late game when there's really not much concentrating on shooting him, if he's not protected, of going and clearing buildings, clearing objectives, clearing your backfield, going into your opponent's zone. So use him that way. He can be a very good solo character because he's so tanky, especially later in the game when your opponent has less things to be able to deal with a character like that. So that's a good way of using him. He doesn't match up well against smashier characters. He doesn't match up well against Smash Captains, Demon Princes, anything that can smite him. These are all things that he does not match up well against, so don't push him into those matchups solo. Especially like Drago kicks his ass, Valdis kicks his ass, although Valdis whiffed that one time against Nick, but that's a one-off. Normally with smites and multi-damage, like, just kind of dies. So, pick your matchups carefully. D3 damage, anything with feel no pain really ruins your day. So Death Guard is tough for him. He went into that Death Guard guy with the 3 damage scythe and did like 1 damage or something. Like, anything with feel no pain is bad for D3 damage in general, so he's no different. Okay. If you're playing transports, land raiders, Coronas tanks, then you can find a way of putting him in the transport. He doesn't give you any defensive auras, so you can put him in the transport, and that will really get him forward fast and give him an extra 3 inches when he comes out. So that can be a good way of using Trajan. Of course, he takes up one of your slots, and those transports don't have a lot of slots, but you putting him in the transport is often a good idea. Okay. So I'm going to talk at the end about psychology of Trajan. Okay, we'll skip that for now. We're going to talk about the end. Okay, so mission-wise, secondaries. Okay, so he obviously is a character. He will give up Assassinate. You got to spend a lot of effort to kill this guy, and most Custodes lists will only have 2 or 3 characters. So Assassinate is not a super good pick against us, but some people may pick it. As almost certainly one of your 3 while you fight targets, can be pretty good, and then you play him more conservatively in those games, not like how I play him, and then he will give you your 5 points at the end of the game for surviving. It's pretty hard to kill Trajan, so he's a pretty good part of the triad that you need for while we stand, while we fight. It's really not him that gives up those points in those games. Usually it's the Vexilla or your shield captain you played a bit too aggressively. Bertha is another component that is often good and hard to take care of, but Bertha can die, land raider, stuff like that. So, but he at 195 points is often one of the 3 parts of that secondary. So keep that in mind when you're planning how to play him if you pick that secondary. If you really need to, just save yourself 5 points. You could even use the Moment Shackle heal, stuff like that. So, in the late game, so just going back to a question actually before we start that. So, if you do take while we stand, while we fight, obviously I feel like you should consciously make a decision not to be as careless with him. Because that is that's 5 points for you at the end of the game, which is a lot. There are not a lot of 5-point secondaries. So I feel if you do take while we stand, while we fight, and he's one of the 3, you need to change how you play him a little bit. You can still move him up, but don't go charging him around, and make sure you have him character protected. And that brings me to the next thing I want to discuss, which is letting Trajan die. So nobody has yet taken Slay the Warlord, and nobody will against you. So losing and assassinate, is important sometimes. So situationally, many times later in the game, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, Trajan is by himself, maybe sitting in the middle. He's not got the character protection anymore. Do you try and save Trajan if the opponent really puts energy into it? And you gotta look at where you're at, your board state, the score. So you got to have a good understanding of where the game is right now. And then often, just let Trajan die. In fact, sometimes if you leave the character protection with Trajan on purpose and stand in an objective or something, make it tantalizing, make it tempting for your opponent, they will spend a lot of firepower to try and kill this guy, and they'll kill him. But it's no big deal for you. It doesn't matter. In fact, you'd rather them shoot Trajan and spend their whole turn trying to kill Trajan than kill your 3 Terminators that you really wanted to survive, or your Venatari, or some other unit that is going to do much more for you next turn than old Trajan standing in the middle. So situationally, at the beginning of your turn, you got to think, what do I want Trajan to do? Is he doing very much? Can he do much? If he can't, then maybe I give him up. I make him a tempting target. Put him in the open on an objective. Make it hard to resist shooting Trajan. Everybody loves to kill Trajan if they get the chance. And we're going to talk about the psychology of Trajan in a second. But if you make him a target and and it doesn't matter if he dies, often it doesn't matter, then then do it. And it can really save your other units, which are the units that you really want. So think about that. It works with other characters too. Vexilla standing out in the open, lots of people can't resist shooting the Vexilla. Shield Captain on bike, same thing. All our characters have the mythic behind them that you need to try and kill them if you get the opportunity. Trajan is the highest of that. So put the Captain General out there if you want as a sacrificial lamb to achieve your goals. Yes, Emperor. So, question in the chat. Very few people are going to take Slay the Warlord unless it's against Knights. Yeah, like Slay the Warlord is just a tough secondary to get a lot of points off of unless you have specific ways of doing that. And then they can always hide the Warlord. So, yeah. So, okay. So, that's a little bit of a experience thing that I've learned over the last 5 or 6 games, that sometimes actually you can bait Trajan out there to absorb firepower. People are like, oh, you left your character out in the open. You'll be like, oh, shit. Did I? Oh shit, too late now. And sometimes they take the bait and sometimes they don't. But yeah, so that is a thing you can use to your advantage. Okay. So the psychology of Trajan. Okay, the psychology of Trajan really goes back to Jeff Robinson. Rest in peace, Jeff. Jeff was really the first Jeff was really the first to, like, you know, his favorite phrase, Trajan fucking Valoris. Excuse my language. Trajan fucking Valoris. And he was the first person to really put Trajan out there. A lot of people were playing Trajan, but because Jeff was kind of famous, he put Trajan kind of on the map. And many people weren't using Trajan because he was expensive. His shackle was still just like D3 back, and you know, there's those kind of things, D3 damage, like all the reasons we weren't taking him before. And so he kind of put Trajan on the map. And then because Jeff actually like won SoCal and was a good player, he kind of got a little bit of a legend behind him, Trajan. And so there's a certain psychology about playing against characters like that. G-Man, Trajan, you know, Calgar, you know, stuff like that. And so you can use that to your advantage. So one of the things we just talked about, you know, baiting him out into the open, letting him seem like he's a good target, only to survive all that shooting, or maybe dies, but it doesn't matter. That's using the psychology of the myth behind Trajan Valoris to your advantage. A lot of people will not try to shoot him, even if he's in the open, because they just have this image that he's so hard to kill. Now, he is kind of hard to kill, but he's not super hard to kill. Same with people will not. I don't think I've ever had anyone charge Trajan unless it was like end of the game and it didn't matter anymore. But people will generally think twice about charging someone like Trajan, just because he has this mythos and psychological thing behind him that he's a beatstick. He can be, but he can be pretty weak too. So you can use that to your advantage to, as we said before in the psychology episode, you know, projection of force. So Trajan, standing on the midfield objective, projects force in a bubble around him that is approximately 6 inches plus 2d6 inches large, which is a pretty big bubble. So, and especially later in the game when you're trying to get weak, depleted units onto the midfield objective, he has this basically controls that whole center of the board. And that is mostly psychological, although there's some truth to it. But you know, you have to use that as a projection of force. So that's just a good example of somebody, name character with a myth behind him that increases your psychological advantage when you're using him. So that's really kind of the myth of Trajan, really. Teval Haggleslag, Trajan's true purpose is providing free strats in a soup list. Prove me wrong. Okay. I'd have to read the rule again, the FAQ, to see if you can use it on non-custodial strats, but I don't know. I don't have to prove anything. Okay, so overall. So Trajan overall is a strong character. He's got many good features to him. Very few bad features, D3 damage being maybe one of the most bad features to him. And otherwise, very strong consideration to go into every list that you build, with consideration being consciously put in to take him out. His CP regen on the Moment Shackle is really, really, really strong, and often the only regen that you need. If you use him correctly and keep him active, now remember, okay, this is one of my bugbears that people know. He often doesn't make back his points in terms of what he kills. Who cares? How many points a model kills is irrelevant to its role in the game. It literally means nothing. If he gives you all these rerolls, all right, gives you 3 CP, sits on the middle objective for 3 turns, and then beats a few units up, how many points is that? How many points is that worth? I don't know. It's a completely useless way of measuring efficacy. So don't do that. All right. It's way more to a model than just how many points it kills, to this model anyway. So it is definitely a strong consideration for doing lots of things if you play him properly. So that is deep dive on Trajan. All right. Questions in the chat. I'm going to go to the Discord. Did not drink a single sip of water for the last hour. All right. Is Trajan the most glorious of Golden Glory? He'd be more glorious if he had flat damage, but he's pretty glorious. Would you consider it legal to use 10,000 heroes to give Trajan another Warlord trait? No. Not all of us play 2,000 point games. How do you feel about him at 1,000 points or 1,500 points? So I don't play those lower points games, so I don't know from experience. But the lower points you go, the less things there's going to be around that are able to kill him. Although the larger proportion of your army he is. So he's like 200 points. So at 1,000 points, he's 20% of your army. So you know, you're paying more for him relatively at lower points games, but he becomes that much harder to kill. So I don't think anybody should begrudge you playing Trajan in like a Crusade campaign, because he is the leader, the Captain General. Like there's nothing more fluffy than playing Trajan, right? The first model you buy is the leader. I'm gonna buy Trajan. So people who moan about that can go fuck off. Okay. Secondary question. Why doesn't he have a glorious helmet? He does. It's right there. Look, he's holding it in his arms. Woohoo. Woohoo. Doesn't focus. Don't know why. Okay. Valerian's comments in Regent's Shadow that while Valerian isn't sure he could take Moloch 1v1, Valdor could. Does anybody want to do the math? I don't know. I can't remember that part. Moloch. He was like the Thunder Warriors or something, like the head of the Thunder Warriors or something like that. So yeah, I don't know. So Sean Stryker brought up a good point. Obviously, in lower point games, you get less CP, and he can still give you same 2 or 3 CP for free. So that's true too. Okay. Do you ever use Moment Shackle for healing? So like I said, I've only used it 2 or 3 times in all the times I've played Trajan, and almost always was underwhelmed. I rolled a 1 or a 2, Curse of the D3, and then he just died anyway. So it just seemed like a big waste. But at the time, there was nothing else to use it on. When you have to choose to use it, you don't have a strat to use, and you can't fight at the end because you're not going to survive. So, you know, if you're going to end up using it, it's kind of in a self-made situation. So it's a little bit biased situation. Ditto to the extra combat. Yeah, so again, as I discussed, you know, using the fight again can be situationally good. Obviously, keep in mind that he can hit noodly at times. Okay, so that is all the questions on Discord. So I hope that was useful, guys. Please leave comments below in the YouTube comments if you like the format. Or if there should be a section that I missed or didn't add or that you want me to cover, or if you have any more questions about Trajan or how I use Trajan, there's all my 9th edition battle reports, and many of the ones before that have Trajan in it. So do check them out, and you can see, like, I do get better using Trajan throughout the last kind of 9 or 10 games. So let me know, though, if the format is good. And if there's any other sections that you want me to add for future deep dives. And the next deep dive may be next week, and we will go and talk about the Shield Captain on Bike, the old biker cap. And so we're going to cover the biker cap next week or the week after, depending on how the call goes. Okay, so that is it for our streams this week. Everybody have a good Labor Day weekend, and we will see you on Monday night with Carlos Kaiser right here on Canhammer TV. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing and following. Thank you to the patrons, and thank you for all our sponsors. And see you guys next time.